The trains never stopped. Day and night, they rolled across occupied Europe, crowded with families who had no idea what awaited them. Mothers clutching children, old men gripping prayer books, suitcases filled with clothes for a life they would never live. The journey ended at a place whose very name would come to embody horror, Auschwitz. From the outside, it looked almost ordinary, barbed wire, watchtowers, brick barracks. But inside, it was something else entirely, a machine. Not a factory of steel or coal, but of death. A place where human beings were stripped of dignity, identity, and life itself with chilling efficiency. This was not chaos. It was not madness. It was cold calculation. A system designed to murder millions while hiding the truth in plain sight. How did it work? Who ran it? And what was life or death like inside history's most infamous camp? Today, we peel back the layers of Auschwitz, not to sensationalize, but to understand. Because only by confronting how it really operated can we grasp the depths of human cruelty and the warning it still carries for us all. Auschwitz was not one camp, it was a system. Nearly 40 subcamps spread across southern Poland, controlled with military discipline. Yet for millions who passed through its gates, Auschwitz meant one thing: death. The journey itself was often the first execution. Across occupied Europe, Warsaw, Salonika, Amsterdam, Paris, families were forced from homes, rounded into ghettos, then ordered onto transports. Jews, Roma, political prisoners, Soviet POWs, all were told they were being resettled. They packed bags with food, blankets, photos, wedding rings, believing they would start anew somewhere in the east. Instead, they were forced into sealed cattle cars. These were not passenger trains. Wooden planks, no windows, a single bucket for waste. People crushed together so tightly they could hardly sit. The stench of sweat, urine, and fear filled the air. Journeys lasted days. Some cars carried 80-100 people. Many suffocated. Infants cried themselves to silence. When doors finally opened on the ramp at Auschwitz, the living stumbled out into blinding light, stepping over the dead who had not survived the trip. The scene that greeted them was bewildering. Barking dogs, shouting guards, searchlights glaring, the sharp smell of burning from distant chimneys. Prisoners in striped uniforms rushed to unload luggage, shoes, coats, bags. Families tried to stay together, clutching one another's hands. But within minutes came the selection. SS doctors stood on the platform, their white gloves pristine against the filth. A flick of a hand, left or right. One direction meant forced labor. The other meant immediate death. Mothers with small children, the elderly, the disabled. Nearly all were sent directly toward the gas chambers. A survivor recalled, "I saw my mother walk one way and my father another. That was the last time I saw them." Those chosen for death were told they were going to shower. They were led to underground changing rooms, ordered to undress, fold their clothes neatly, remember the hook number where they left them. It was all part of the deception. The chamber doors closed. Guards above dropped Zyklon B pellets. Within minutes, screams turned to silence. The bodies were dragged to crematoria, furnaces burning day and night. Ash was scattered in rivers and fields. Meanwhile, those selected for labor were processed like livestock. They were stripped naked, their heads shaved, disinfected with harsh chemicals that burned their skin. They were tattooed with numbers, identities erased, replaced with ink on flesh. Personal belongings were stolen. In warehouses nicknamed Canada, the Nazis sorted piles of shoes, mountains of glasses, suitcases stacked like bricks. Even toys taken from children were stored for reuse. Prisoners were issued striped uniforms, wooden clogs, thin blankets. They were marched into overcrowded barracks, where wooden bunks stacked 3 high-crammed hundreds into spaces meant for dozens. Rats scurried through straw bedding. Nights echoed with coughs, sobs, prayers whispered in dozens of languages. The day began before dawn with roll call. Prisoners stood in freezing cold, sometimes for hours, while SS counted and recounted. If one prisoner was missing, all suffered. Beatings were constant. Sometimes entire groups stood in snow until men collapsed dead, their bodies left for all to see. Food was calculated starvation. A thin soup of turnips, a crust of stale bread, a dab of margarine. Not even half the calories needed to survive. Prisoners grew skeletal, their faces hollow, their eyes glassy with hunger. A man might trade a day's ration for a pair of shoes, or a spoon, or simply for mercy. Labor was relentless. Hauling stones, digging trenches, building roads, working in fields or factories. Hours stretched endlessly, regardless of weather. Guards struck without warning. Collapse often meant execution. And yet, even here, humanity flickered. A woman shared half her bread with a stranger. A prisoner whispered a prayer before sleep. A lullaby sung in the barracks carried echoes of home. Auschwitz was designed not just to kill the body, but to break the spirit. And yet, despite everything, people clung to fragments of dignity. That resistance of spirit was the first rebellion against a system built on annihilation. Behind the brutality of Auschwitz lay a terrifying truth. It was a system of order, a machine, not of chaos but of precision. At WWII, the original camp, SS officers and administrators oversaw operations. To them, it was routine, paperwork, quotas, schedules. They lived near the camp with families, children playing in gardens, even as smoke from crematoria drifted across the sky. This contrast, domestic normalcy beside mass murder, revealed the depth of Nazi dehumanization. Auschwitz Roman II-Birkenau, built across open fields, was the true death engine. Completed in 1942, it spread over hundreds of acres. Wooden barracks stretched endlessly, barbed wire electrified, guard towers looming. At its core stood 4 massive crematoria, each with underground gas chambers. Designed by architects and engineers, they represented murder industrialized. Trains rolled directly into Birkenau. Victims disembarked, went through selection, and within hours many were dead. The gas chambers could kill up to 2,000 people at a time. Crematoria ovens burned 24 hours a day. Ash was shoveled into pits, rivers, or used as fertilizer. Every step was calculated for efficiency. Nothing was wasted. Even gold teeth were extracted from corpses. Human hair was collected, packed, and shipped to German factories. Slave labor was another pillar. Auschwitz Roman III monoliths fed workers into IG Farben's synthetic rubber plant. Prisoners slaved 12-14 hours under brutal conditions. Exhaustion, starvation, and beatings killed thousands. Companies profited enormously. For Nazis, prisoners were not people, they were raw material. Medical experiments deepened the horror. Josef Mengele, the so-called angel of death, conducted experiments on twins, injecting chemicals, amputating limbs, performing surgeries without anesthesia. Others tested sterilization techniques, disease injections, and chemical burns. Children were especially targeted. These crimes were carried out under the mask of science, but were nothing more than torture. Violence was omnipresent. Guards beat prisoners for the slightest infraction, a glance, a stumble, a word in the wrong language. Capos, prisoners given authority, often became brutal enforcers. Roll calls turned into spectacles of punishment. Public hangings reminded all of the cost of defiance. And yet resistance existed. Prisoners sabotaged machinery, slowed work, or smuggled notes to the outside world. Some secretly recorded numbers of deaths, hidden in jars buried beneath the camp. In October 1944, Sonderkommando prisoners staged a desperate revolt, smuggling explosives from female workers. They blew up crematorium IV before being overpowered. Most were killed, but their defiance echoed as proof that courage lived even in hell. Between 1942 and 1944, Auschwitz became the epicenter of genocide. Jews from Hungary, Greece, France, the Netherlands, all were transported to this single place. Over 1.1 million people were murdered here. The system worked not by chaos, but by structure, bureaucracy, and ideology made absolute. By late 1944, the Nazi Empire was collapsing. Soviet forces advanced from the east. The SS began evacuating Auschwitz, forcing tens of thousands of prisoners onto death marches. Through snow and ice, in thin uniforms with little food, prisoners stumbled westward. Those who fell were shot. Villagers watched silent lines of skeletal figures pass their towns, living shadows of what had once been men, women, and children. On January 27, 1945, Soviet troops entered Auschwitz. They found about 7,000 prisoners too weak to move. The liberators were stunned. "We could hardly believe they were human," one soldier said. Skeletons with skin, hollow eyes, barely able to speak. The camp itself revealed horror in physical form. Warehouses filled with belongings, hundreds of thousands of shoes, glasses, suitcases. Human hair packed in sacks, piles of ash still warm in crematoria ruins. The scale defied comprehension. Survivors faced new battles. Many had lost entire families. Some could not return home, finding their towns destroyed or hostile. Others carried trauma for life, nightmares, guilt for surviving when others did not. Yet many bore witness. Writers like Primo Levi and Elie Wiesel turned their suffering into testimony, refusing to let the world forget. Justice came unevenly. At Nuremberg, Nazi leaders were convicted. Rudolf Höss, Auschwitz commandant, was tried and executed in 1947 at the camp itself. Yet thousands of guards and collaborators escaped punishment. Memory became the survivors' weapon against denial. In the decades after, Auschwitz was preserved as a memorial. Today, millions visit each year, walking the same paths, standing in barracks, confronting piles of belongings. The silence of Auschwitz speaks louder than words. The legacy of Auschwitz is more than numbers. It is a warning. Hatred does not begin with gas chambers. It begins with words, with prejudice tolerated, with neighbors turning away. Auschwitz shows what happens when indifference joins ideology, when bureaucracy makes murder efficient, when human beings are reduced to numbers. Survivors repeat one plea, never again. But never again is not automatic. Genocides have occurred since. Hatred still festers. The lesson of Auschwitz is that vigilance is constant, memory is fragile, and silence is dangerous. Auschwitz is not just history, it is a mirror. It asks, what would we do today? Would we speak or would we turn away? If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Here, we uncover history's darkest truths so that its warnings are never ignored. Because Auschwitz is not the past, it is the present's greatest warning.